Hello and welcome to the third part of this lesson on creating an interior view within Rhino. We're going to be following on from the last lesson where we left off, which was at this stage where we just textured our model, we'd set up our lighting and we've got a scene that's ready to render out. Now I've added a little bit more detail, I've added some shelves in here and also an extra roof light at the top. And this lesson is really going to cover rendering out the image in Rhino and using Illustrator and Photoshop to start to work into some colour and more texture into the image. Now we're actually going to start with a quick lesson on modelling curtains and fabric, and I'm just going to try and model in a curtain at the top of this view here because it was something that I saw a lot of you were trying to do last Tuesday. So I just want to quickly cover how I'd go about doing that in a view like this. So for a curtain, I've got this red rail at the top and we're going to use this as a kind of guide for where we want our curtain to hang down. We're going to basically have a bit of fabric kind of hanging down next to this railing for this view. I might use it, I might not, we'll see how it turns out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and I'm actually going to isolate it just so I can just work on this railing and not have anything else in the view. So just going to click here and select isolate objects. So I've just got my railing there. I'm also going to, in the front view here, just copy this down so I've got a top and a bottom of this railing too. Now I'm going to be using the sweep command to help me make this curtain, and I'm going to start by drawing out a couple of different cross sections of what I think the curtain would look like when it's hanging down. So I'm just going to draw that using this curve tool here. I think let's try a few out. And once it's, usually with curtains it's sort of the most of the bulge is at the bottom because of the weight of the curtain. So we'll try and draw a few out. And you just want to make sure these are all different because the idea is we're going to be using them to sort of sweep together to then create a kind of differentiating curtain as it swings around the rail. I'm just going to select the best ones of these. Let's have a go with these ones here. Now I also want them all to be the same length, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to draw two lines from my rails I've done and just use these to trim the top and the bottom of these curtain railings like so. So now they're all the same length. So now that's done, go back into our views and in perspective I'm going to move these along and I'm going to rotate them around because we want our curtain to be kind of flowing around this way. Actually we want the bulge to be this way. And I'm just going to place each of these at some point along this line. So we're just kind of equally spacing them out along the line, and the idea is that the sweep, as it goes round, it will follow along these lines and interpolate the difference between and kind of merge a surface between them, creating a fabric-like surface on this. So let's place this one here and this one. Let's place it at the end of the line, like so. There we go. So we've got our 4 lines. You can see here, just equally placed along the line. We're now going to use the sweep 1 command, select our rail, which is this top portion, and then select our cross sections, hit enter, and there you can see it's just swept that shape along the rail, and we've got this kind of fabric-like surface now. And I mean, the kind of more extreme you draw those curves, the more extreme the shape of this will be. So you can kind of use it to make any shape you want, really. So I'm quite happy with that. So now we'll just go show objects, right click to go back to our scene. And you can see there we've got this sort of now hanging down over that rail. Oh, just lost our view there. Okay. Like so. Now I've also got this in a 3D layer called curtain. It's here. And I've actually created a material for it as well. So I'm just going to quickly go through how I did that and what that looks like. So in materials, I'm going to make a new one, just call it curtain 2. And I kind of want this to be semi-transparent. So you can see here that we can slightly see through it, but it's slightly different to if it was not there. So we're just going to go down to the transparency, just pull this up so you can see it, and we're going to make the transparency very subtle. Let's put it on like a 12-14% there. You could also add a kind of fabric texture to this as well if you want, just in the colour. Let's see here. Let's try something like this one. And obviously you'd have to texture map that onto the material as well. So I'd then go and select the object, back to properties, texture mapping, just like we did in the last session, and apply a box mapping. And depending on the size of the image, I think my image is quite small, so you then want to make the box representative of that size. And there you go, you can kind of see that that's now on, and we've got a semi-transparent material. We also need to apply it to our layer. So just select the new Curtain 2 material, right click, assign to layer, and I'm just going to assign it to my curtain layer here. Like so, there you go, and you can kind of see that that's now got the texture on as well. The reason it's kind of warping like this is just because of the viewport. When you render it out, it should render out fine. So I'm going to do a quick preview of that, see how that's looking. I'll make sure you're in the right view obviously as well. And okay, and render preview, let's have a look. Now we've got quite a few different materials and objects in the scene. Obviously the render preview is taking a bit longer than it was at the start of this. Now you can change the transparency of this if it's too much. It might be that you don't want it as see-through as this is, but that's the kind of basis of it. And I don't think we're going to use this for this particular scene, but that's the kind of basics of creating a fabric-like material and playing around with it in the Rhino render. So what we're going to do, I think we'll actually just hide this for now. And I'm just going to hide these lines too. My curves I've made. Like so. I think there might be one more. There we go. Like that. So now we're ready to render out our scene. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to render this once as it looks like here. It's important to note as well that I want this to be a square image in the end, but I'm actually going to render it slightly longer, and the reason for this is that I can then crop down and get a bit more of this top part of the ceiling. I usually render my images a bit bigger than I actually want them to be, that way you can kind of crop the image later to get it at the perfect size, and it's a lot easier to do that in Photoshop than it is to get the image right within Rhino. So just checking my render properties, I'm going to render it out. Make sure you're in the right frame, obviously. Now, I've locked my viewport aspect ratio, so what this means is that it will render out at the exact size of this viewport is set. And the reason I've done that is I'm also going to do a make 2D and lock it to the viewport as well. That way I can then easily merge up the render and the make 2D together when we go to putting them together in Photoshop and Illustrator. So just click that box there to lock the render to the size of the window it's in. And that's about right for the size. I think we're going to keep it like that. So when you're ready to go, obviously just go back and then hit render, and we'll let that render out. Here it goes. So that image is now fully rendered out. That took around 5-10 minutes, 7 minutes there, to do in total at 1500 pixels, which isn't too bad really. So we're going to save that out. Just save it here, and that's number 3. And what I'm going to now do is we're now going to do a make 2D with this view as well, which we're going to be using in combination with our render. So within this view, I'm just going to type in select visible, and then we're going to drag a window over all the objects we want in our selection. Should have the door there as well. And then I'm just going to do a make 2D of this view here, maintaining the source layers as well. And we'll just let that go through. Great, that's now finished, so we can find that here. So we now have our make 2D of our view as well, and we're going to be using this in combination with our rendered view. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to just put this on a layout page so I can just control the size of it as well. And I think for this we'll make it an A2 for now. There. Just get it so I get that square frame in as well. And I'm just going to right click and print that out as a PDF. Save that here too. So for the final part of this, before we start working into it in Photoshop, I actually want to do another render of this view, but I want it without any textures in the scene, and because of that we're going to be using that as our shadow layer to help sort of brighten up our image or darken down areas moving forward. So to do that I'm actually just going to save out a copy, just save it as, and we're just going to call it shadows. The reason I'm doing this is because I'm going to then kind of get rid of all the materials on this and just add a white material over the top of them, but keeping the lighting the same. So I'm just going to make a new material, just call it white for now, and we're not going to do anything to it. Just going to keep the colour as white and keep all the settings the same. Then we're going to select visible again, all the objects in the window, like so, and then we're just going to assign this to the objects. So we've just gone over all our materials in the scene. It might be that because I'm using blocks here, some of these have still got the colour. That's actually okay. It doesn't matter if objects have a different colour for this phase, because we're going to be making this image black and white in Photoshop anyway. But it does matter that the textures are gone. We just want a blank kind of finish on everything. So that would do for now, and we're then going to render out this at the same aspect ratio and size as our previous one. So we're not going to change any properties there. So that's now finished rendering out, and you can see that only took 4 minutes this time, so when you lose the textures it's a lot faster to render out, as you can see. So we're now going to save this one as well, and we're going to call it number 3 shadows. So now we have all the main components for our image. We're now going to try to start to work them up together and import them into Photoshop so we can then start to add in textures. So for this part of this lesson we're just going to be looking at how to kind of merge the files together, and the next lesson we're going to be looking at working into these in Photoshop a bit more. So what I'm going to now do is I'm going to open up Photoshop and we're going to load in those images we have together in the file. So we've got our images here, and actually before we go into Photoshop I'm just going to start by opening the Make 2D up in Illustrator. I'm just going to do that by dragging the PDF into Illustrator here, and you can see we've just got the lines there. So with this we're going to start by cropping the artboard just by going Document Setups, Edit Artboard, and we're going to crop it down to this frame we have rendered out for ourselves, which will match our rendered views we've also done. So this is because we want the aspect ratio of our Make 2D file to match that of our render. Just snapping it to the edges there, like so. Now it might be that for your particular image you want to add some line work in as well as the rendered parts. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a copy of this layer and just copy these lines. Oh, sorry. You'll find that when you've imported any kind of PDF which you've exported from Rhino into Illustrator, you'll have this thing where you can't select individual lines, they're grouped together. To get them off that group, it's called a clip group here. If you just click on this edit contents icon, it will select everything in the group, and then what I usually do is just cut it, Control X, and paste it back in place, Control Shift V, like so. And that just breaks up all the lines again, so they're back in their parts. I'll also delete this frame here, because this is a clipping frame. It's used in Rhino to help kind of group, it's the window into the Rhino model. You don't actually want that in Illustrator because it can ruin your live paint settings. So I'll get rid of that too. And then we're just going to copy these lines onto a new layer just on top of each other. So we have two versions of that. Now one of these we're going to call lines, and we're going to lock this now. And the other one we're going to be converting into a Make 2D, a live paint layer, just by under the shape builder using the live paint bucket and just clicking in the group. Now what that means is we can then start to add in colour into this image, into the objects, and we can use this as a way to quickly colour up parts of our scene. A lot of the time with the live paint, if you just hold down on the bucket, you can start to just fill in objects like so. If you double click, you'll fill in everything simultaneously. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go around and I'm going to quickly add some colours into some of the objects in the scene, and we're then going to be using these in combination with our rendered file to help add in some extra colour or texture into our model. So I'm going to pause the video, quickly colour in a few things just using the live paint bucket tool and selecting different colours, and then we're going to go from there. So you see here I've started to colour in this view. Now you'll notice that I've chosen some very kind of bold colours at the moment, and the reason for this is it actually doesn't matter what the colours are at this stage because we're going to tweak them later in Photoshop. The key thing is that all the colours are distinctly different, and this is so we can easily select them in Photoshop using kind of Photoshop's tools there. So I'm actually just going to stop with this for now. We might add to it a bit later, but for now I think it'll be fine. The other thing before I export it is we want to get rid of the line colour on this file. So to do that we'll just select the live paint and just under the line, under the stroke colour here, it will have a kind of question mark next to it. We're just going to select this no colour just to get rid of that. And also in the layers we're going to now hide the layer above. So we've just got this kind of block colour layer on top there, as you can see. So now what we want to do is we want to save this out. I'm just going to save this as an Illustrator file. We'll save one copy out as lines file, and then we're going to just delete this lines layer so it doesn't come in when we bring it in, and save this as fills. The reason for that is that we might want to go back later and edit the lines specifically and add lines into our drawings, so we just want to have two separate files for that. So now that's done, we're now going to load in our two rendered views into Photoshop, and then we're going to add on our line fill on top. So I'm just going to start by going scripts, load files into stack, and we're going to select those two views we've rendered out here so they overlay directly on top of one another, like so. So there we have the two views, the shadows and the textures overlaid on top of one another. Now I'm going to get my lines and my fills file, and we're going to just drop that in on top, and we're going to crop to the media box here. Let's go OK, and that then directly drops in on top as well, which is great. That's what we wanted there. So also going to just rasterize this layer on top, so it's just got these kind of solid fill colours. So there we have our kind of 3 layers of our image on top of the other, just like when we were working with our external view. So in the next session we're going to start to kind of merge these layers into one another, overlaying them kind of to add more shadow onto our colour. We can vary the colour by going back to the Illustrator file and editing this, and we're going to be working forward with that and kind of working this image up in Photoshop. So see you in the next session.